As a lot of you know, I was in Mexico for the first part of the week. Seems strange, I was there this week. I was with a friend of the congregation and one of my dearest friends, Tim Rose. Tim lives in his van. He has for 6 years, by choice, not by necessity. And his big white cargo van, which he lovingly refers to as Van of White, was the perfect vehicle for a road trip from San Diego to the Baja Peninsula. Any vehicle with a queen-size bed and a freezer for frozen treats is a good vehicle for any road trip, in my estimation. And there are many sights along the way south that struck us both. The landscape was chief among them. There were these stretches on the road by the beach that seemed to have clouds hanging on them. We wondered if this was some form of ground evaporation that was settling in the air there. We talked about this a lot. We wondered if the ocean and the ridge were working together to trap the moisture there. Obviously, two people who know nothing about weather. But they really looked like clouds. And it seemed strange to be driving through them, right at sea level. Now, I bet some folks in this group here can explain that phenomenon, which is one of the many reasons I love this community. They always tell you, keep people smarter than you around, and you can't go wrong. So, it was another sight that was most powerful, though. I landed in San Diego, and we stayed the night before there, driving south. There's a vegan fast food place in San Diego called Plant Power. And one of my stipulations for the trip with Tim was to make a visit there. We made two, in fact, so thank you, Tim. As we entered the restaurant, there were signs everywhere. Please wear a mask. Wear a mask as you enter. And coming from Honolulu, where that's still basically the rule everywhere indoors, I did so. And then when we got inside, I could see that these signs were meaningless to people. I was the only person wearing a mask in the whole restaurant, including Tim. Now, to quote one of my favorite movies ever, Zoolander, I thought, am I taking crazy pills? Now, I want to say I don't personally like the word crazy because of the way it so often is misunderstood and it misuses mental health matters, particularly in references to women, studies have shown. But I hope you'll forgive this quote from a movie that is very zany and close to my heart. But that is how I felt. Like I was the only one paying attention, like I'd been taking crazy pills. And in the morning, we drove south. And the longer and longer we drove along Mexico's Route 1, along the Pacific Ocean, the smaller and the smaller the towns got. They went from having a Costco, a Home Depot, and a Walmart to having one convenience store at best. They went from having housing developments and high-rises to having a collection of maybe a dozen or so businesses on either side of the road. And in those small towns where dogs wandered onto the road with no regard for cars, where children chased each other from building to building, playing in the waning sun, where proprietors of roadside stands waited for customers to stop, everyone was wearing a mask. Now, I know that the vaccination rate in Mexico is just a shade under 30%, so it does make logical sense that people were wearing many more masks, but the difference was so stark to me. And the experience in just 24 hours in one of the wealthiest cities in the world, San Diego, with the greatest access to healthcare, to villages where that kind of access is mostly undreamed of, added to that feeling of difference, the feeling of frustration, the feeling of fear, frankly, that many of us are feeling right now amid a surge in cases, hospitalizations, and deaths once again. And all those feelings are bubbling over, friends. I know it. I have heard stories. I've been on the other end of people hanging up the phone on siblings who disagree about whether to be vaccinated. I've heard armchair ethicists dither around with what kind of duty of care that you really owe someone else in these times. I have spoken to teachers, to parents, to friends, and more who have this sort of, what the hell is going on here, look on their face. One of my neighbors is a teacher, and in speaking with her yesterday, her wide-eyed disbelief that this is happening and how the administration in public schools in Hawaii is handling or not handling the health of teachers and children was palpable, was shocking. So when her border collie Luna gave up on standing and slumped to the ground to eat grass, it was like she was reading her own mom's mind. So what side are we on? It's easy to think that I'm on the right side of an issue, that someone else is on the wrong side. And it's really tempting to let something as simple as a little medical visit that gives you this little piece of paper, something so simple, so seemingly innocuous as something to separate us into sides. But there is little that is innocuous about inoculations. Anything that is separating us from one another, anything causing ruptures in families while creating fear in some that to others is flatly unfounded and creates real appreciable danger in the lives of many more, all while having a real devastating impact on the mental well-being of a city, a nation, a world, all of that is not innocuous. So much of this thinking, these fears, come down to some of the most basic ways we were taught to care for one another and for ourselves. I mean, this is kindergarten stuff, right? These ways of caring, what some of our religious ancestors on the Unitarian side of our family actually started to provide at a very early age to as many people who would listen, well, for as long as they could get them to listen, because, see, it was well-known Unitarian Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, a kind of public intellectual, sometimes Unitarian matchmaker, who led a charge to bring as early as possible into the lives of the youngest among us the teachings of a program that would provide essential grounding in understanding, relationships, and in learning. Many today simply take for granted something that we each have had in common, I'm willing to bet. And were it not for Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, we might never have shared that, because it was she who brought to this country a program we call today kindergarten. Kindergarten. Yeah, we're talking about the mid-19th century. It's nice to have congregants here. Before Peabody, kindergarten was a foundling program by German thinker and educator Friedrich Froebel. It was Peabody who made it her life's work to bring the teachings of kindergarten to all who would have them in the United States. I should say this was perhaps Peabody's second or third act in life. First, she ran a famous bookstore where intellectuals of the day all gathered. She published volumes of The Dial, the most influential magazine for transcendentalist thinkers. And she watched one of her sisters, Mary Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the other, Mary Horace Mann, the great education innovator, in her own famous bookstore, before stating that the institution of marriage for her was not something in which she had any interest. And then she set about changing the face of education in a nation forever. Makes me feel like I have a little more work to do, or a little more light to light under my bushel, if I may. I know. I am doing the thing that I've said it would be good to stop doing, which is extolling the virtues of long-dead accomplishments of long ago Unitarians as somehow relevant to today. But this is different. This is different than Emerson or Thoreau and saying we should go back to that way of living or thinking as these rich white men did in the Northeast. Peabody's influence is different. It stretches across generations and into a year of virtually every person's life who is listening to me right now. And the hope that she had for kindergarten, which should come as no surprise to anyone paying attention to the first two syllables of that word, was to increase in some of the youngest among us a shared sense of belonging, compassion, and kindness. The root of both kindness and kindergarten goes much deeper than simply kinder, though. The older root is closer to the meaning of kin, which means part of a whole that bears similar traits, not so much being alike or the same, but differentiated with shared interests, goals, and possibly genetics. In short, you could say it means to give birth to. And garden means what it sounds like, a garden, a shared place with fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All I need is a rake and a hoe and a bit of fertile ground. I'm only doing that one verse. I think I chose a key in the middle of two keys. The year was 1985 or thereabout, and somewhere in southern Connecticut, a young Reverend TJ was invited to sing his first solo in a cafetorium filled with all of his kindergarten classmates and some of their parents. I've told this story before, I think, because I was dressed, as one would, as an eggplant. We were all representing the different vegetables that they grow in a garden as little kindergartners. I was the eggplant. And those were the words I sang into that silver microphone for all to hear. They say, all you ever really need to know, you learn in kindergarten. And I remember learning perhaps the most important lesson of all that day. Whoever has the loudest microphone wins. No. That was not the most important lesson. It was just a helpful lesson. I honestly don't remember much about that day or the event. I remember learning the song. I remember being up there with my friends, and I have the pictures to prove it happened. But I'd be straining to say I have a lot more to tell anyone about what I really learned in that moment. It's only after, later in my life, reflecting on what I was singing, to whom I was singing it, and where I was when I did, that the full meaning, the full import, the full measure of the devotion of a one-time bookstore owner, matchmaker, publisher, and advocate for education stretched across more than a century to bless my little life. But isn't that what a garden is meant to do? Isn't that the kind of person we look up to? Isn't that the kind of people we want to be? One of the things I love about this congregation is what I started to feel was a slogan when I first got here: to boldly grow compassion, justice, and joy. It's a good slogan, but it needs to be more. We call it our mission, and I know in many ways it is, so I know that we aspire to make it more to this community than just a saying, and that's good. I have faith that it can. And one of the things I promised when I got here 4 years ago was that Sunday worship would not change very much very quickly. And I have kept that promise, perhaps to a fault. And I've given everyone 4 years of not having much change in that regard. We have had a lot of other changes happening over the past 4 years to deal with. You might remember that we spent the first year together figuring out whether we should renovate the top 2 floors of this building or whether we should find another spiritual home. And through the wonderful work of the congregation, we arrived together at a decision to do so and to stay here in this building. Then there was the process for deciding whether I would stay here for the foreseeable future as a minister of the congregation. And we all arrived at that decision too. And then the pandemic hit. Nobody got a vote in that, friends. See, congregations, like a lot of groups of people, can only handle so much change at a time. I know. And as we consider, as we look forward to coming back together, we have a duty to consider so much about our life together as a community that will change. How we gather, how we share food or meals, how we share space, how we treat one another. All the conversations are happening already. All those wonderful skills we are going to need that we learned where? In kindergarten. That's right. We're going to be essential to us all once again. And to prepare us for this change, I want us to learn more and experience more about what it means to be part of this community, to live into its mission, to boldly grow compassion, justice, and joy. And that is why you heard me sing a new part of worship today. That is why we will sing that after we light the chalice every Sunday. Because when we light the chalice, what are we doing? We're kindling a flame, right? And so it is that every single Sunday, and so many of the ways we gather as a church, as a movement of like-minded persons or groups, we kindle a flame. We strike the match and join the chorus of thousands who do the same across the globe in their own ways every Sunday, indeed every day. Like so much in worship, this is a metaphor. I might say it is the metaphor. It is the way we remember together that we are alive. We are together, and that there is so much in the world to do that remains yet undone. And that is ours. That is all of ours to do together. And we can feel it coming, can't we? Inch by inch, the creep of the callous ways of seeing the world divided into sides, into groups, comes for each one of us in the night. So inch by inch, lighting by lighting, we must reclaim that ground, that common ground that grows in places like this, that welcome all who welcome all. Row by row, the lines of the news feeds churn out ways of dividing, ways of separating us with a steady diet that convinces us we need more of it all to live. So row by row, chairs of pews, row by row of chairs of pews, of living room couches, where we gather to do better, to learn more, must continue to grow in ways of learning, ways of sharing that uplift the hopes of a future yet unwritten, yet unlived, yet unknown. We witness a world with a way of thinking that seems to want to make a garden grow by yelling, screaming, or fighting with the flowers to bloom. So we must remember those projects in kindergarten when we planted seeds and waited for them to sprout and blossom on their own schedule. All we did is tend to them, care for them, and love them until they do, and feed the fertile ground in which they grow. For it is truly a fool who yells at a flower to grow faster. There is yet no inoculation against a culture of white supremacy, so we gotta keep tending. There is no inoculation against a culture of want based on scarcity of money, scarcity of kindness, scarcity of love, so we gotta keep tending. There is yet no inoculation against a culture of fear, of warring sides, of nightmarish fates across the face of a hurting world, so we must keep tending from the first kindling of that flame to the ways we grow and learn like we learned to do in kindergarten, through the ways that kindness comes to all who would care for all who would guard, all who would celebrate together the sacred, the rare, perhaps the eternal spark of life. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Earth, warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down. Our reading by Naomi Shihab Nye, done so beautifully by Carol, calls to mind the kindness that comes from only a few shared words at once. In her story, this led to that sacred moment when sugar speckled the new friends at the gate. For me this week, crossing provincial borders and military checkpoints in a foreign country, I was nervous. I know just enough Spanish to get myself in a lot of trouble. But as one soldier was searching Tim's van, he opened the freezer and spotted it. Nothing more illicit than an ice cream sandwich from Trader Joe's was in that freezer. But after a quick affirmation that he was welcome to it, in my shaky Spanish, the joy in his eyes perched up over his mask was unmistakable. He took the ice cream sandwich, put it in his pocket, it's kind of weird, and went on his way. So did we, thank heavens. A sugar sacrifice, a wafer of an even sweeter communion, passed across fictional human-drawn borders of nations and imagined borders between human souls doing the best they could that day. But what really passed between, as sweet and satisfying as it may seem, is the cup, the chalice, really, of kindness that every one of our ancestors knew in some measure so that we could be here today, so that the rudiments of our very lives could come together, could be born, could be kin, so that the pieces of our young lives could be shaped as in a garden, a kindergarten, and come together at last to kindle this flame that holds the very essence of each of our beings, the very warmth of our souls, the very spark of our lives, so that we drive through our lives as we may. We might see the clouds gathering around the road with our heads in the clouds and yet find our ways on the pathways, our feet grounded fully, our feet always there, grounded in the pathways to compassion, justice, and joy. And may it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.